Tejas.
Hey Brooke, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you today?
I'm doing really good. I'm having a great Tuesday. I forget what day it is because like I don't work anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm having a good day so far.
Well, tell me about that because like I was seeing on Twitter, I don't know, a couple days ago, and you were saying something like you're on the verge of like this breakthrough, or it was, I can't remember exactly, but it was something like that. So you're not
Yeah,
working,
yeah,
unemployed, but yet you're on the verge of this breakthrough. So what, tell us about that.
yeah. It's interesting because like I was talking to Kitsa the other day, and I was telling him about how we were talking about we were talking about me leaving Zeta where I used to work, and I said to him, and he could relate because we're both like young men, but I'm sure more people can relate to this idea that when you have a breakup, you know,
Right.
you kind of that's when you start like thinking about yourself and reflecting and like, was it me? Was it them? Was there some combination?
Yeah.
How do I and then you start thinking like, oh, if I did this, then maybe that would have happened, or if I was different in this way, that would have happened. And like you start
Yes.
ideating, right? um yeah, and so I was doing that. I was like, how could things have gone differently at Zeta or with other employment relationships? And then my mind tends to wander, so then I went to like, how would have things differently if I was less this and more that and so on.
Right.
And I've essentially identified a bunch of ways in which I could grow, as you do, when any separation happens. And that's kind of what that was about. Yeah, just kind of recognizing like the path to the next level up, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you recognize that path, I feel like the world has this like abundance of resources, like therapy and books and media and etc. For growth. So I recognize this path. I found some resources, and I'm just able to like work on myself and become. A lot of people, thankfully, have given me a lot of compliments over time. You're so this, you're so that, you're so positive, whatever, and those are lovely, and I'm thankful for them. But I've been able to recognize where I'm not so positive, etc., and then work on myself more. So that's kind of what that tweet was about. Like, ooh, I found a path, and I'm excited to pursue it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love, and I actually relate to that on a very personal note because I actually just I did a brave thing myself and quit my job about a week and a half ago. And
Whoa.
I've never done anything like that. I've always been employed since high school, like graduating high school. So it's very new territory for me, but I completely relate to that of like self-reflection. What could I have done differently? I mean, I had my reasons, and I feel very strongly about those reasons. It is not something I do lightly to quit a job, but still I think it takes that moment of like, what can I do to improve here? And yeah, I really relate to that, like that self-reflection and always finding ways to improve. But
Yeah,
it's kind of a renaissance of sorts, right? Like
exactly.
a new chapter in your life. And I'm trying to be really positive about it and excited because it's an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to find something different and that is better for you. And I don't know, there's something that keeps coming to my mind that I heard a while ago, and I absolutely love the idea of this thought where it's like that life doesn't happen to you, it's happening for you. And
Yeah.
so even when scary things happen or bad things happen, it doesn't have to be scary or bad, and I don't mean to diminish the severity of those things, but it can be an opportunity as well. And so that's where I'm trying to take that positive outlook. But it sounds like you're doing the same thing.
Yeah,
So
I am. And to add to what you just said about these things not necessarily having to be scary or bad, like one of the things that I've learned recently, in my renaissance, in my pursuit of this next level up, in my pursuit of this path, is so many things, arguably everything, is like that. It's less about the thing and more about what we believe about the thing. And I was thinking of two specific examples, for like these two examples really blew my mind thinking about them, because like recently I was in my house and I had a glass break, right? Like one of these like Coke Zero glasses.
right.
um and I was like, yeah, it's cool. I have more of those. meanwhile, if I drop my very expensive iPhone and the glass breaks on that, I'm like, ah, no, it's another $1,000. I've got to, especially
Right.
now that I don't have a job. Um, and I was like, huh, interesting. In both scenarios, glass broke, but I just believed the IKEA glass was replaceable, where in reality, the iPhone itself is also replaceable, to be
Right.
fair. It's a very privileged thing to have the latest iPhone. I could have any iPhone. Um, and I was thinking about that. It's what I believed in the moment. This is actually a huge deal that I dropped my phone. That made it so much more painful in a way.
True.
Or the second example I was thinking of was like, so I don't know how much you know about me, but I'm no stranger to like physical pain. I've got a ton of illnesses,
Okay.
physically and limitations and so on. I can't extend my arms. Like this is the maximum. I can't make this straight.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. And so, I was thinking about like pain in your arm.
Yeah.
A lot of people will be like, oh, that hurts. That's bad because we believe it's bad. But if there's more context given that maybe the arm was like paralyzed before, then in this case, the pain's a good, oh, I feel something in my
Right.
arm, So like what we believe about the thing really shapes our response to it, be it a scary
Absolutely.
thing or not. All that to say, you kind of said like leaving a job with no other plan is a scary thing. Yes, I agree. It can be a scary thing, but I think it's just because we somehow believe it's like the end or we're going to be poor or there's some beliefs there
Right.
that I think that I've been personally spending time on that help me kind of um adjust the way I see the world and
Yeah.
have more peace. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, I love everything you just said. And it's about that the mental game, a lot of it, and just how you perceive it, but also the energy that you're generating back out about it. Because I feel like if you stay in that place of fear or negativity, then that's what you're attracting back to you. But if you can stay in a place of positivity and thinking forward, that's what you'll be attracting to you. So,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
what like to corroborate what you just said, to make it more real, right? One of my really good friends, his name is Jim Brown. He used to be a US Army general,
Okay.
but he's no longer he does something else now. He's not actually allowed to tell me what he does.
Oh,
Anyway, he
okay.
works with the US Department of Defense, and he likes to tell war stories. And I
Okay.
was talking to him once, and he said, the only time he remembers of his soldiers getting shot at or even dying on the battlefield is not when the enemy shoots at them or anything, but it's usually when they get afraid. When that fear, when the mental game gets them, they're like, okay, they've lost. Sometimes even their life. And it's so interesting to hear that from you about the mental game and about how the positivity or negativity affects the outcome, and from him as well. I think there is definitely something there. So that's also something I've been kind of thinking upon on these past few weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Lots of good stuff there. And I think it does relate a lot to what we're here to talk about, because we're going to talk a lot about learning and teaching in some ways, because when I think of you, I think of a great teacher of sorts, right? And but I think a lot of it does have to do with that mental game, the mental aspect of, this is really hard, I can't learn this, this is so overwhelming, versus I can do this. And just having that positive outlook and forward thinking, I think, can change a lot of our experience with learning, with teaching. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. I think you have some really unique perspectives on learning and teaching programming that not a lot of people do, because of your experience, like getting up and giving presentations and talks and whatnot. So yeah, I'm really eager to talk about this. Tejas is someone who, and I want to get more of your story as well. I think you have a fascinating story, but you started speaking publicly, like around the globe, at quite a young age. I think 17-ish is what I was reading.
Yeah.
And since then, you've become a very sought after public speaker, but you've also held a handful of very, successful positions as well at companies like Spotify and Vercel. And the one that you mentioned is pronounced Zada.
Nobody knows how it's
Okay.
nobody knows how it's yeah, Zeta, Zara,
Zeta.
whatever.
Okay.
Um,
Zeta. So, but you've had a successful career as an engineer, and then, like I said, all of this, the public speaking you've done on top of that. But let's kind of rewind that a little bit and tell us how you even first got into programming. Where were you first exposed to it? What were those first experiences like for you?
Yeah, I grew up very, very sick. Physically, I often like half jokingly say that I have the worst genetics in the world. Maybe an overstatement, but I have a bleeding disorder where the smallest thing, like literally just like waving at someone, would cause me to bleed internally, and then
Wow.
yeah, literally, like I'd lose a ton of blood, pass out and nearly die, and then I would have to be taken to the emergency hospital and then resuscitated. This was like a weekly occurrence for
Wow.
18 years, for 23 years of my life. The reason being, there is treatment for it. So if I was like randomly born in a country of privilege, I would have been okay. But I was born in India,
Right.
not a country of privilege, and where like you need to buy this medicine, which is what I take now is like $27,000 a week. Um,
Wow.
Good luck. So,
Right.
and then we eventually we somehow moved to Qatar, the Middle East, where I grew up. And there the treatment was free, but only in case of emergency.
Okay.
So like my life for 18 years from that point when I was 4 was wave at someone. Oh no, I'm bleeding internally. It's very painful. I feel it,
Right.
but I just have to sit there and like wait until it's an emergency, and then go to the ER and get treated for free, and then spend a week in recovery, and then wave at someone again, and the whole cycle repeats, right, for 18 years. So there
Yeah.
was all that to say there was not a lot I could do. Putting on a backpack or taking a flight of stairs or literally anything would cause me to have an emergency.
Wow.
So what I could do was play computer games. So we had like an old Windows 3.1 computer back in the day, and no one really knew what it was or what it was for. We just had it.
Yeah.
And there were some awesome old like retro games. There was like Prince of Persia on it.
Okay.
There was Descent, Raptor, a bunch of anyway. And I would play games, and that's all I could do was just mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
Until at some point, my parents kind of decided, hey, it's time for the kids to do something extracurricular. Not Tejas, because he can't do anything, but I have a healthy brother. And so extracurricular, they sent him to like a computer class,
Okay.
where he learned the basics of HTML. And my brother was born healthy. I was born the way I was born. And so, with that comes some level of survivor's guilt, like, man, that should have
Right.
been me, for my brother. So he has always felt, he still does feel this need to like make up for it by
Okay.
enabling me to succeed. So he
Okay.
would come back home from his class and like just brain dump, like, hey, I learned this today. Open Notepad, write Angular bracket HTML, head, title, body. And
Nice.
now if you save this as something.html, look, you can open it in the browser. Whoa, and for me, I was like, dude, because I'd spent so much time on the computer at this point,
Yeah.
doing literally everything. I was like, that's a website. So I saw it for what it was. I was like, oh my God, that's a website. He didn't spend as much time as I did on the computer. Neither did my parents. And I was like, dude, that's a website. Now all we have to do is somehow host this thing on the internet. And then like I've put something
I've made
on
it.
the internet.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't know how hosting worked at the time. I was 8. So I called my friend on the phone and I said, hey, can you visit like tejas.com, and just in case, is maybe my thing's on there,
Nice. Yeah.
And it wasn't. And he actually told me he couldn't visit the website because we were on the phone, and in those days the phone and the internet were like
Right. Same line.
yeah, but that's kind of how I started. So I wrote my
Okay.
first 2 lines of code when I was like 8. And from there the focus shifted from video games to like, okay, what else can I do with this?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. Now, all right. So one question that comes to mind, might be a slight detour here, is that I've had some health issues as well. And so I know from a very real place how when your health isn't well, learning can be twice as difficult. And when you're in a place of such, like you said, an almost emergency, at any moment you could be off to the emergency room. So you're kind of living in this state of like, you can't really move. You're not really sure what to do, but I can only imagine that that would affect your mental state as well. And just always being in this place of uncertainty. So how did that play into your ability to learn? And do you feel like it taught you, like, I don't know, better practices? Do you feel like it helped your learning or hindered it? And how did you get around that?
That's such an awesome question. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it, right? Because at the time it was very painful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the pain allowed me to have like tunnel vision. So I'm not white. I don't come from privilege. I was never born into it. To this day, I have tons of disadvantages. Like we didn't have internet access as ready as we do now, so I could not have like gone and watched Netflix if I wanted to, because it was dial up and we paid like by the minute. We didn't have a PlayStation. I had like no distractions. So in fact, it's interesting I say this because the learning how to code was actually a distraction in itself from the sickness.
Pain. Yeah.
Yeah, from the pain, exactly. And also, I spent most of my life being coddled, like, oh, let's feed him, let's clothe him, let's do everything for him. And I hated it. I was like, God, I just want one thing. I want one thing for myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
And coding was that one thing. But at the same time, like, I really think that's the biggest value, because after moving out west, like to Germany and experiencing like Western culture, I see a lot of adolescents and young adults who don't know what they want to do with their life,
Right.
and who, lack direction. And oftentimes, like one of my best friends is in a similar place. Like lacks direction because, well, there's so many different things I could do. I could be an actor, I could be a musician, I could study business, and this analysis paralysis like paralyzes them. And so for me, with my sickness, I never had a choice, which sounds bad, but actually turned out to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of how I was able to learn, because like I literally couldn't do anything else, and I wanted to prove myself because I was always the weak, sick child.
Mm-hmm. I love that though, because I do think that with programming, it takes, and other things as well, but programming is one of those things that takes such a tremendous amount of focus and thought. And yeah, I agree. I just think that it gives you something that you're so focused on that you don't have time to really think about the pain or your circumstances or what's going on, because you're just so laser focused on learning these complicated, algorithms and like putting things together. And I don't know. So I like that. But
and I think I have two thoughts about this. One, I never once saw it as learning, but I saw it as like solving problems. I was like, oh, it's kind of like the equivalent mental picture is like, oh, I have this Rubik's Cube and the colors have to align. Now imagine being in like prison in solitary confinement and there's literally nothing else you could do.
Right.
But you're given a Rubik's Cube. You best believe you'll be solving that every day, right? Like that was essentially, it sounds very sad, but that was my childhood. And also, given the pain and the sickness, I was born like this. So from a young age, I was once clinically dead at age 4.
Wow.
I learned that life's not going to be kind to me. I'm not going to get things fall into my lap. I'm not going to like, I need to, not, I hate the word hustle, but I need to make things happen because life's mean to me. I was born broken. Are you kidding me? So that also helps like kind of drive me to learn.
Yeah. That focus. Wow. So then how did you get into public speaking from there? Because you were saying that the blood disorder started getting a little bit better around 23 and you started speaking around 17. So how did that all come out?
Yeah. This is where I confess my evil. So I feel like if you're, living on the street poor and starving to death, you will steal food. That's human nature. Like survival is everything, right? And so
Yeah.
as I grew up, and became like 13, 14, 15, I developed a way to game the system. And this is bad. I'm not proud of it, but like I did the math, and then keep in mind at this time there'd been considerable amounts of time spent problem solving, algorithms, data
Right.
structures, engineering. So my mind has been since age 8 like conditioned to solve problems as an engineer. And so I thought, well, I can't get this medicine unless it's an emergency. So let's just have some emergencies. And so I overplayed. Like I would start to bleed internally, and in the past I had to wait for an emergency. But as I grow older, I was like, you know what? This is going to be an emergency in 8 hours. I know it. So I'm just going to act like it's an emergency right now. And I'd walk into the ER, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And some doctors would see through it. They'd be like, oh, come on, go home. But others, they knew what I was doing, and they were like, well, it is going to be an emergency, treat him. And so I kind of developed a way to prevent emergencies. And just, and once I could prevent emergencies, my life became a lot more predictable. And then I could plan for public speaking and so on. I had the privilege of, I don't know how really, but being pretty articulate. I guess part of it was because I couldn't do a lot of things. I would code, but I would also like, especially as we got like more like broadband internet and stuff, I would spend time watching really great TED Talks and things, and really admire people's ability to like tell stories and convey ideas. And I was like, wow, this is awesome, because these people are talking about things that people haven't heard of, and they're really educating.
Yes.
And I spent some time consuming that to the point where I was like, I'd like to give it a try. And in 2013, there was a local TEDx event in Doha, in Qatar.
Okay.
And I said, I'd like to speak there if there's a chance. Well, what would you like to speak about? And I said, this disease I have is very rare and not common, but I feel like if I tell people about it, then they'll know, and then maybe treatment gets better for people worldwide, And they said, oh, great. Yeah, let's do it. So we had some dry runs. I was given a 10-minute slot, and that was my first talk ever. It's still on YouTube, actually. It's called,
nice.
it's called Paper Cuts Can Kill.
Okay.
And yeah, that was the first time I did it. And I've never done a public talk before, but it was extremely good. I mean, I got a standing ovation. People were in tears. It was a whole thing. And yeah, I don't know. I never like learned it. I guess it just kind of had been inside me over the years, brewing or something,
Yeah. No, and I will say, like, I don't think you took control of a situation. That to me is, when you tell that story, that's what I hear out of that, is that you had this circumstance that you couldn't help, and you were just trying to take control of something so that you could actually make those first steps. I don't think there's anything to feel bad about with that. Everybody needs to have that sense of control in their life. So
Yeah.
that's awesome though. Like, and you had that drive to go and give this talk. And that, what I'm relating to here now, though, you mentioned stories and how you were watching these other people as they're giving their presentations, and how so much of that was stories. This is something I've been really, really reflecting on from an educator's perspective, from a teacher's mindset of how can we make programming easier and more approachable for other people, for learners. And even if you've been in programming for a while, there's always still something new to learn. So how can we make these new concepts more approachable to people? And that, to me, is where a lot of my thoughts have been coming back, is this idea of storytelling, right? Like, think about when you're in math class as a child, or you're learning difficult concepts, and how is it that the teachers make sense of the math? They give story problems so that you're solving something that you can wrap your mind around, you can contextualize. I don't know that that's being done a whole lot with programming yet, right? But when people get up and they give presentations, it's all about a show. And I don't, have you heard of Shai Resnick? at all?
I have, yes. Yes,
Okay.
very briefly, yeah.
He does this really, really well because he gets up and he used to be an improv comedian,
Nice.
and everything that he did was all about making stories and, entertaining people. And so now he does his edutainment, and it's all around these plots and scenarios and things. And that his talks are so popular. And I think that's why, because he's giving them a context, a story. And it sounds like that's what you've done as well. How, speak to that. Does that sound right to you? Do you think I'm way off?
No, I think you're on the nail on the head, because I about giving my first talk as well, what I failed to mention, now that I think about it more deeply, is, look, I grew up in a bubble, right? Like literally it was very solitary. My parents went to work, my brother went to school. I was alone with the computer for 18 plus years. And, well, not 18 plus, I would say 10 to 15 years. And in this time, like, how do you develop social skills? You
Right.
don't. You don't at all. And now, you have people left and right saying, "Oh, Tejas, you're so charismatic. Wow, you're fun at parties." What people don't know is, so in 10th grade was when I was allowed out,
Okay.
because of I that's when I learned to like hack the system, right? So I got more predictability. I could go and socialize with like school friends, people who knew me vaguely. And at this time, I remember so clearly going to have like lunch at Pizza Hut with some school friends, and it was like 3 guys, 3 girls, and me. And I was just like sitting there, just really awkward. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to say it. I was like, what do I do here? It was the most awkward interaction of my life, because I was outside in the world for the first time. Went home after that, and so I've been, again, like indoctrinated with this like engineering mindset. Went back home and literally typed into Google like how to be cool, enter,
Nice. Yeah.
and consumed so much stuff about what makes a great personality, what makes somebody charismatic. When you speak, what makes people want to listen. Consumed all of that to the point where I was able to craft whatever personality I have today. This is all learned. None of it was natural.
Yeah.
And then I did the TEDx talk, but also started doing stand-up comedy. So like, I was also, you talked about this edutainment and improv.
Yeah.
I also used to do stand-up comedy for a few years. I think somewhere between 3 and 5 years in Qatar. There's a comedy group called SUCQ, SUCQ, and a stand-up comedy
Okay.
Qatar.
Nice.
And I used to do a lot of that. And now when I do talks, I bring that, because I feel like, to me, the most important thing, whether or not the talk is like technically advanced enough,
Right.
is what's more important is how people feel. Do they feel like they've learned something? Do they feel like, oh, I can go back and use this thing? Do they feel like they were able to listen? Because what I've noticed is when people listen to a talk,
Mhm.
and if they're not able to like pay attention or connect, like, it's not the speaker that they criticize often, it's themselves. Like, they'd be like, oh, I'm just not competent enough to listen. A bad talk can amplify imposter syndrome. And that's kind of what I know. So when I do a talk similar to the improv edutainment aspect you mentioned, I always try to go for that, is like, hey, how am I going to make sure people feel like competent and enriched as well? And
Okay.
and with that comes storytelling. With that, like you talked about learning math in math
Right.
class, it's usually the apples, right? Like, hey, if I give you 2 apples and then tomorrow I give you another one, what is that? 3. Oh, addition, it's that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. So do you feel like, well, and actually let me reframe this a little bit. What is it aside from that then that you feel like makes your presentations really helpful for learning value? What gives them that high learning quality? And I guess really what I should ask is like, how are you breaking concepts down in a way that makes the learning more approachable to someone than, say, like reading an article on the same topic?
That's really, yeah, I think there's a ton of people. This is just, this is not empirical, right? This is conjecture, but I do feel like there's tons of people who, if you give them a book, they're going to be like, okay, but where's the pictures?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there are people who prefer blog posts. Sure, but I feel like the majority is people who are like, look, just talk to me. There's people who prefer learning from YouTube versus some book. What I do is, or rather, how do I bring the learning value is, for me, first and foremost, it's really important to establish relatability, kind of like you and I were relating to each other early. I think it's very important to establish it. Listen, the things we're going to talk about, we don't have time in our day-to-day jobs to like look into like the internals of React or whatever, because we just use it. We don't need to understand it. That's the whole point. So I established, listen, we're all on the same footing. And this talk is about something that you, like me, have probably been thinking about, but have not had the time to look into because life is so busy, right? So that's usually what my talks are about. Is like, if I was to do an Angular talk, it would be something about how Angular does change detection. How does that even work? Like, we all benefit from it, but how does that work? And the goal is not that we all go and write our own Angular after this, but if we understand those, then we get mentally richer, mentally wealthier, and we can take that capital and invest it elsewhere. So that's kind of what I go for.
I agree. And I actually was talking with someone in another one of my videos, and he said that one of the greatest things he's learned, and it ties in so well with what you just said, is that as a teacher, you're helping people see that they actually already do know this concept. They may not think it, and they may feel dumb, and they may feel behind, or like they don't get it. It's just not coming. But he said, if you can relate it to something that they do understand, an analogy, something that they do grasp, then you can easily say, you do get it. And you are already there. We just need to teach you the context and the vocabulary in this particular situation. And then all of a sudden the light bulbs just start going off, right?
Yeah. And I have the luxury of watching light bulbs go off en masse. And it is the most beautiful thing I've seen. I think another thing that I wish my teachers did for me in school, that I wish that I try to do as a teacher myself, is explain why I'm even talking about this thing.
Yes.
For example, like in chemistry class, I wish my chemistry teachers did this, which, in chemistry class, I used to look at these chemical equations, like left-hand side, and then an arrow and the right-hand side. And this arrow was really kind of like an equal sign, but it wasn't an equal sign. And I was like, why is it like this? And for whatever reason, I was hung up on this arrow. And then I started learning about carbon isotopes, and I'm like, okay, cool, isotopes, awesome, but why? Like, I never knew why this is so important. And the teacher never really mentioned why. And so I kind of breezed through high school chemistry going like, I don't get this. I'm probably never going to use this, whatever. And this is my fear as a teacher at conferences, that people are like, oh, he's talking about Angular change detection, whatever. I don't want this, right? But if the teacher had come to me and said, hey, listen, this allows creating, like, knowing about carbon isotopes enables us to work with materials like graphene that are like harder than diamonds, but soft and light. And you could make an Iron Man suit out of this stuff. I was like, whoa, okay, I want to invest in this. I want to learn this. So getting buy-in by explaining why, a teaching topic is as important is, I think, something that's really important to me as a teacher. And I wish more teachers would do that, is get your buy-in to learn before they just start teaching you for some grade.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with it more. And the other thing that I'm thinking of too, I used to be a teacher. I taught elementary school before I got into programming. And as an example of something I think that's really effective with teaching is, like, you need to give an example of what it is you're doing before you launch into it. Because so often someone will say, okay, we're talking about, they'll give the topic and then they'll just launch right into what they're trying to explain and teach, but they don't actually ever give you a visual example of what it is they're building. And the example I can give of that is like with third graders. If I ever said, if I was teaching them how to write a paragraph or a story, and I said, okay, we're going to write a story and it's give 3 reasons why you love wintertime or summertime, whatever it is. And then you just say like, okay, go do it. We've been practicing writing sentences. Now you go write a paragraph. You would have 30 different interpretations of what that means by the end, because I hadn't given them an example. But if I took 10 extra minutes and just showed those students, here is what I'm looking for at the end. I want a paragraph. I want an introductory sentence, and I want, this sentence, this sentence, this sentence. And then at the end, you need your, your concluding sentence. you give them that example, and then you say, now go give me an essay, go write your story. You would get back 25 examples of what you had just asked for. But giving them that example, demonstrating to them what it is you were asking, made all the difference. And that's another thing. I see it here and there with programming, but I don't feel like I see it enough, where people don't say, like, this is what, when you're building this component, this is what it looks like in your application, right? Or when you're doing dependency injection, here is the end result, and here's a map of the files that are all touched.
Yeah,
that's so important.
I agree. And coming back to chemistry class, same thing. Like if somebody, like the classes I remember now where I've paid the most attention is where, like, my chemistry teacher has like a Bunsen burner and they start like boiling water and they're like, look, this thing is liquid and now it's steam. How does that work? And then I'm like, ooh, how does that work? Tell me. Exactly. It's like showing you the thing and then explaining why the thing is important and what the thing is.
Yeah.
Kind of like the component, right? This is a component with dependency injection, but we use it here to make this amazing web experience.
Yeah,
I think that's really important. Yeah.
So next thing that I want to ask you is your learning. We talked about how you're helping others learn, but when you learn, even now, you've developed a lot more skills than you had when you were 8 and 9 years old. But what does learning look like for you today? When you sit down and there's something new that you'd really like to master, what does that look like for you?
That looks to me like two parts. There's a theory and there's a practical. And so, for example, let's use an example of like Elasticsearch, right? I don't know it, but if I wanted to, I would literally just start at the docs and read the docs top to bottom. And I fully recognize, like, before I even start reading the docs, I fully acknowledge, like, there's going to be stuff in here that I'm not going to understand. There's going to be stuff in here where there's not going to be a light bulb going off. I'm just going to read the words. That's it. I don't have to understand. I just have to read. And this helps me kind of get like a high level overview of like what's actually possible, what APIs are exposed, whatever. And then once I've gone through the docs fully, I'm like, okay, now let's play. And this is really the fun part. So like I get to apply what I read in the docs and think of like, what project can I build with this? Well, Elasticsearch is kind of like an Algolia search engine competitor thing. So let's think of maybe IMDb, like a giant movie database, and build a search engine for it. And then I'd practically apply all of the stuff I read in the docs. And once I build it, like I've been an engineer long enough to know that building something isn't enough. Part of building it is building it, deploying it, monitoring it, and making sure it behaves predictably over time. Right. So all of that comes into play as well. And I can officially say, like, I've done learning this thing when I've built, deployed, and monitored a system at production. And then maybe even scale. I think scale is really important, but that's something you don't get access to unless you're working at like a FANG company or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's usually my pipeline. And this is for any, like if I wanted to go and learn Angular today, that's what I would do.
Okay.
And that's just how to use it. And then when I feel like I don't like the word master, but when I feel like I have a good working knowledge of it, I start poking into the internals, like looking at the source code, the call order of functions. And those are usually those become conference talks for people who are curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you start turning it into something you can teach other people. So that seems to be one of your, I guess, secret weapons of sorts of how you actually learn things, is by turning around and figuring out how to teach it to other people. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Einstein who said, like, nobody really knows anything unless they can explain it to someone else. So I think that's true. And also, to be fair, full disclosure, another way I learn things is under pressure. So I do this thing. If you're a conference organizer and you're listening, stop listening. But I do this thing where like I'll pitch a talk to a conference and I'll be like, oh, I can talk about, change detection in Angular. And they'll accept. They'll be like, great, your talk's in 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh no. And then I have to learn. I have to learn enough to explain. And so over the next 2 weeks, like nights, weekends, plane rides, whatever, I'm just learning. with that process. I go straight
Yeah.
to the docs and etc. So the
Okay.
pressure element also really helps, because when there's no pressure, we kind of go back to the adolescent thing I talked about earlier, where it's just like, well, I could learn anything. I could learn jQuery, if I could learn whatever. And then I end up learning nothing because
Right.
of that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot too like your personal learning style is more where you're, and I think a lot of it has to do with because you were so isolated as a kid. Do you still learn most of your concepts in a like individual private setting, or do you find that social learning helps you? Because it's interesting that you teach a lot of people in a group setting, but for your personal learning, do you sit down and pair program with people? Do you mentor or like have a mentor, or is it mostly done with just you and the computer and figuring things out on your own?
That's such an awesome question. I'd never made this connection before, but a lot of people say, if you want to go far, go together, go alone. But if you want to go long, go together, or something like this. Yeah, definitely. So when I personally learn, I literally just go into a hole and I come out 7 days later and I'm like, okay, I know it.
Nice.
I do mentor, I teach people, but also in a group setting. It's been part of my job, and I think I do a reasonable job. But I don't learn well in a group, mainly because like I tend to grasp concepts relatively fast. And so if it's a large group, like a workshop or something, we're on concept A when I'm already wanting concept F, and
Right.
it takes a while. I like to learn at my pace in isolation. I've never made that connection before. That's really cool that you're able to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love seeing these, I don't know, just everybody's individual learning path. I think it's fascinating to see. But now you've mentioned something else, and I think we'll kind of wrap up on this. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but you have been someone like in your professional positions, you've had that opportunity to help train teams, train individuals. So what have you found, or do you feel like there is anything that's kind of essential when it comes to working with new hires or with junior developers? Are there things in teaching and learning that you feel like absolutely have to be included to help people really grasp concepts?
Yeah, I do. I have some hard lines that I think are really important. I think, um, firstly, I think it's really important to never assume any knowledge, because I've had this happen to me where, I've had somebody explain some data science thing to me. That's my weakest point. I'm not really good at data science. But somebody was explaining something to me once and would end every sentence with, so when you get the cap table into the pivot table and the CSV and the semicolons, right? And they would like end every sentence with the word right. And I would feel this like pressure to be like, yeah, totally, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is for me a no-go when I'm teaching someone. I do not end any sentence with like, right? You get it, right? No, you don't get it, and that's fine. We can talk about it. That's why I'm here. Second, jargon. Not everybody knows what a git commit is. And some dude bros right now are like, what? How could you not know that? I'm like, no, there's people who don't know that.
Yeah.
And so assuming that people get the jargon is something that I avoid like the plague. And yeah, I think those are because they tend to amplify imposter syndrome and pressure people into saying, yes, I know this, because we're all, me, even everybody, we're afraid of looking ignorant.
Right.
And I feel like knowing that as a teacher is essential, and then giving the emotional safety of like, listen, hey, you don't know this, that's fine. There's a bunch of stuff I don't know, but I'm here to teach you stuff I do know. So let's talk openly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the barriers to learning even are self-imposed by people who try to save face or who are
Yes.
otherwise prideful. And I
Yeah.
think the moment that pride dies and gives way to humility, we can learn. Also from the teacher. A lot of teachers don't teach well because of pride, because, oh, you should know this.
Right.
Because I'm such a great teacher, you should have got this the first time, right? I think pride really kills teaching. There needs to be humility on both sides for good teaching to happen. I think that's my hard line. Those are 3 of my hard lines, yeah.
That is some deep wisdom right there. I think that definitely the pride issue and just being embarrassed or feeling self-conscious. But I love what you're saying there about the instructor, the teacher as well, that don't make those assumptions. Assume nothing. and work with your student to get an idea of what they do know and what they don't know, and then go from there, but don't make those assumptions. So important. So, okay, last couple of questions here. Do you have any favorite learning resources, be that websites or tutorials, blogs? Do you have anything that you can share with anyone watching this video?
Yes. Well, I haven't used it myself, but I'm excited about it. Is there's a new startup that does this thing where they teach you by story. And the story is they like put you in a working production environment and be like, here's how we solve this problem at scale. It's pretty nuts.
Nice.
It's called Wilco. Let's try wilco.com.
Okay.
And it blows my mind. What they're doing is like, for example, if you want to learn MongoDB, they'll have like a production e-commerce store that's like with traffic and everything. And you'll start your course with, hey, there's a problem here with this MongoDB instance. Let's fix it. And so like it's hands-on. And the story is you're a senior Mongo engineer who's joined this team. Let's go. And so you just have to improvise from day one. And there's instructors that will guide you along. I think that's fascinating.
Totally immersive learning. That is, I feel like, groundbreaking.
Yes, I agree. So I'm really excited about Wilco. Another is Replay. I don't know if anyone's heard of Replay, but it's this time travel browser that is, used for debugging, where you record your session.
Yeah.
And the other person gets what looks like a video, but it's actually like an actual browser session. You can like look at call order function and stuff.
Yeah.
But I found it actually arguably more useful for education than for debugging.
Okay.
Because if there's this long, complex algorithm, I record a replay of it and then send that link to a friend. And then we walk through the call stack of like what's called when.
Yeah.
And we can go back in time, we can go forward and really understand how code works. So these two resources I'm really excited about for learning and teaching.
Perfect. Those are amazing shares. Thank you for that. And then, all right, last question, Tejas, is just like, what final advice would you like to share with everybody at the end of our conversation here? Is there something that you just really want to end on and kind of do your mic drop with?
I could go so many ways with this. It's so much power. I think one thing we haven't talked about, but I feel pretty strongly about, is diversity and inclusion in tech, in the workplace, but also in the industry. And the reason for that is I've seen things you're not going to believe, right? Things we probably need another hour to go over. But generally, I have a lot of friends from minority backgrounds, women, people of color, women of color, etc., who experience things that I believe shouldn't exist. And I want to highlight that is an extremely important issue. And really the onus is on the majority to help recover from the issues that are faced there. I also wanted to add one specific note, because D and I go so close together that a lot of people think, oh, if we hire three black people, then the problem's solved.
Right.
But it's not, because inclusion's the other side of it. And I've myself been a part of multiple teams where I was the only person of color and struggled to get words into a meeting. And that is the definition of inclusion, right? People having equal opportunity to speak and contribute. There's been times where I've had to elbow my way into conversations, etc. And I think that's where I feel like the bulk of the industry needs to work. I think there's a bunch of great engineers who can write amazing code across the board. But in terms of like being aware, self-aware, and responsible human beings, we have work to do. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, super important. I couldn't agree more. So thank you for ending on that. I think that's amazing. If anybody would like to connect with you, we have your Twitter handle here. We can share that, but is there anywhere else that you feel like would be a good place for someone to reach out to you, maybe learn more about what you're up to?
The truth is I only have one social network, and that is Twitter. I don't do anything Meta, no Instagram, no Facebook, no WhatsApp.
Nice.
So Twitter, and I create content on YouTube occasionally. So youtube.com/@TejasK. Just Twitter and YouTube. Yeah, happy to chat with people and get to know.
Your videos are awesome. They're really like inspirational just to go back and watch. So I definitely encourage anybody to go check out any of the videos that Tejas has there. And then his Twitter handle is his name. So TEJAS and then Kumar, KUMAR _ at the very end. So that's where you can find him. And thank you so much, Tejas. This was like, seriously, like I said at the beginning, every time I record one of these, it's amazing to see where the direction takes us. But you really do, like, you have such deep insights, and I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your journey, your struggles, but also your successes. And I think that's so important for people to take away from this, is that you will have challenges. They will come, but how you perceive them and move forward despite the challenges, I think, is where humans really have success in life, right? It's your choices in how you move forward with those. So, and thank you for your example of not giving up and keeping your tunnel vision and just pushing through, and still to this day dealing with them, but not letting them define you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I really appreciate that.